Imagine being kidnapped by a goddess, ripped from your normal life, and thrown into a world full of monsters, magic, and heroes, only to discover that you were the only one rejected. Here begins an adventure where no one is safe, and everything can turn into tragedy or luck out of nowhere. Our protagonist is thrown into a deadly forest, deceived by deities, and surrounded by hungry creatures. But that's when he decides to survive in the most insane way possible. Betrayals, massacres, forbidden magic, dangerous encounters, and revelations that change everything. You will feel the tension, the adrenaline, and the sensation of walking alongside him in this cruel world. If you think you've seen a dark fantasy story, this one will prove you wrong. The story begins with a goddess kidnapping teenagers. She reveals that they need to save a world where the Demon King has resurrected. Everyone panics at the kidnapping and forced labor. However, the goddess tries to calm them by explaining that there is a saint to help them at the start. Meanwhile, some ask about systems, knights, and heroes. Soon, the goddess confirms that everyone will be heroes and will only return after defeating the Demon King. Moreover, they will gain special powers. When the explanation ends, the MC asks to leave. Surprisingly, the deity creates a portal and releases him from that world. However, upon crossing, the MC finds himself in a dense and dangerous forest. In addition to fear, he realizes he was deceived by the goddess. Meanwhile, his classmates arrive in Progena. Immediately, they are greeted by the saint and Prince Alsis Swordmaster. Next, the princess responsible for magical support appears. Soon, Ohan Wu discovers blessings and curses in the system. Later, the saint explains that each god observes a different hero. Then she states that she doesn't care about those without blessings. Meanwhile, Kong flees from the werewolves. Despite the despair, he analyzes his blessing and curse. Thus, he concludes that the goddess wants to kill him. When he tries to communicate, he is treated like food. Finally, fairies appear and arrows fly. Additionally, Kong notices a god watching and cries for help. Then he believes he has been kidnapped by a goddess and fears revealing the truth. Moreover, he suspects that the deity is her friend and avoids detailing. Consequently, the system warns that the god is confused, and so is Kong. Soon he asks if he is an excluded one, and the god doesn't understand the term. Thus, he explains that excluded is like a lone wolf impressing the deity. Therefore, the god accepts the meaning and decides to help. Next, a green energy envelopes the arrow and the pain disappears. Finally, Kong thanks and questions the blessing of the excluded. Meanwhile, the blessing resets his conditions and warns about leaving the forest. Then, he escapes silently while the wolves attack. As he flees, he steps on a twig and the monsters chase him. Later, he remembers that he won't feel fatigue and keeps running. However, a stone hits his head and he falls, but quickly gets back up. Now, he runs calmly and surprises the monsters. Upon reaching a cliff, he asks for wings, but doesn't receive them. Thus, he promises food and they all push him. During the fall, he laughs and hugs the monsters. After the impact, he awakens alive among the bodies. Finally, he notices that one of them survived and sees the name Blue Moon Butcher. Therefore, he comments that the level increases with experience and stronger enemies. Additionally, the saint explains that blessings and levels strengthen the heroes. Thus, it is possible to level up with monsters or divine blessings. While some pay attention, others find it boring. Soon, the saint states that the gods are always watching. When asked about intimate moments, she confirms, startling the group. However, the gods say they have no interest in humans. Suddenly, Jang Mian receives the blessing of charm. Then, she demonstrates the power and leaves everyone confused about its utility. However, she discovers a punitive curse. Therefore, the saint explains that gods also curse those they dislike. Soon, the curse causes pain and increases damage for impure acts. The princess encourages Jang to overcome the curse with levels. Meanwhile, Kong finds it strange that his level isn't rising. Consequently, he blames his own curse. When calling the god of the excluded, he realizes he cannot help. Even so, he tries to survive without the world's rules. Preparing a trap, he uses a dagger and vines. As he spins a stone, he applies knowledge and activates his blessing. Thus, he regains control of his body and attacks the monsters. While fighting, he states that he won't die without being killed at once. Despite this, the monsters throw stones and try to tire him out. Then, he counterattacks and defeats them all. Finally, he sighs and the god admits to having expectations. Therefore, he orders the survivor to stop and asks where the humans are. Additionally, the null points in a direction and the protagonist decides to confirm later. Thus, he asks the monster species, threatens, and gets answers. Soon, he falsely thanks and kills it, remembering he never promised to spare it. Meanwhile, he reflects that he still hasn't leveled up and blames the curse. In the temple, the prince announces training in swordsmanship and magic. Consequently, the students can choose either of the two. Choi claims he will not give up, and the prince believes in him. Then, Oh Han-woo asks if he can leave the temple and receives permission. In his room, he reflects that training is optional for those without talents. Deciding to follow his own path, he plans to explore ruins. The next morning, the prince separates the groups and comments on the princess. Meanwhile, Han-woo sees in his system the blessing of the protagonist. Smiling, he states that his answer was there and heads down to the city. Upon arriving at the guild, he decides to register as a mercenary. However, a redhead confronts him and says that many die. Thus, he believes this is part of his blessing. Inviting her to accompany him, he gains her attention. During this, monsters crawl in the forest. Then Kong confirms the location of the village with several gnolls. Believing he has talent, he fights, kills, and grows stronger. Finally, the god watches him, and he admits he only evolved thanks to the blessing. Therefore, he asks how much further he must walk and if the god wants to see him dead. Additionally, a gnoll appears and is quickly defeated with the dagger. Consequently, more monsters emerge, but he cuts them down at once, frustrated for not leveling up. Soon, Kong hears friendly voices and approaches cautiously. Then he finds 3 adventurers. The archer quickly notices his presence and shoots an arrow as a warning. The group talks, and the MC kneels, asking for calm. Thus, he decides to accompany them even without understanding the language. From their posture, he realizes that Gary is the leader, admiring his sword. Meanwhile, the deity complains and comments on the strength of the group. Kong continues observing, pretending to understand to escape the forest. Suddenly, Nulles attack and Gary and Cole advance to protect him. Misa quickly shoots arrows, forcing the monsters to retreat. Then, a huge gnoll appears behind the girl, and our protagonist easily defeats it, leaving the group in shock. But the 3 find the MC's change and behavior strange, and feel he has been lying all along. Feeling threatened, Misa aims at him and shoots an arrow, hitting his heart. The boy falls, realizing the danger of that world. Therefore, the group comments that he was stronger than he appeared. As they decide to take his belongings, they discuss selling the dagger. Finally, they agree that even if fake, it can still fetch money. Thus, upon realizing that even dead he didn't drop the weapon, Misa warns that the shot didn't hit the heart. Moreover, Cole tries to finish Kong off with his sword. Suddenly, the blonde sees the MC's status window, leaving him in shock. Surprising Cole, Kong explains that one must be alive to show status and attacks him mercilessly. Gary and Misa arm themselves, believing the protagonist is a demon. While Gary hesitates, Kong attacks him too. Even hit by arrows, the MC smiles and yanks the weapon from his chest. Misa steps back, frightened by his incomprehensible words. Then she pleads for forgiveness, crying before Kang's psychotic expression. Soon, he looks at her and she begs for mercy from a monster like him. Consequently, Kong changes clothes with Misa, saying it is the most suitable. With the money and the crossbow, he decides to head to the village. Still not understanding why they tried to kill him, he thinks about Misa's blessing. While the god doesn't care, Kong confirms he will follow the initial plan. In the temple, the princess begins the lesson explaining the origin of magic. Additionally, students comment that calculations can make them archmages. While the nerd claims to keep purity from magic, another mocks him. However, a girl says that magic is chemistry and promises to demonstrate. Yet, others remind her that without talent, it is impossible, making her uncomfortable. The princess intervenes, drawing everyone's attention. She declares that talent is indispensable. Moreover, as this aptitude is the foundation of magic, knowing the history of the founder becomes equally essential. At this moment, the group appears confused, trying to understand the meaning of her words. The princess reinforces that among all qualities, talent is the most decisive. Shortly after, she creates a flame in the palm of her hand and clarifies that it depends on lineage and magical education, asking them to memorize this principle. Then she states she is the legitimate daughter of her family, and at the same time a product of her learning. She reveals her name, Athena Arch-Mazing, descendant of the founder's 3rd husband. She carries both the heritage and the connections and assures that this group will have great potential as heroes and disciples. At this point, Yubora raises her hand, asking a question. The doubt is whether someone without noble origin and without education can still become a mage. The students murmur that it is a good question, but insist it makes no difference. The princess remains silent for a moment and smiles, excited, confirming that it is possible. Then she holds Eubora's hand, promising to explain later. Next, she announces that Eubora is a heroine, and she agrees. As she closes her eyes, Athena declares that the young girl will be under her tutelage. A magical breeze surrounds Eubora. Then a luminous circle appears behind the two, and the princess officially proclaims that Eubora is her first apprentice. The students are left speechless. Some fall back, demanding a magical oath. With her eyes half closed, Athena makes the vow. An intense light courses through her body. Eubora remains with her eyes closed. Upon opening them, she receives the princess's congratulations. Athena states that she is now a full-fledged mage. Eubora is surprised trying to understand what just happened. The system confirms that she has acquired the rank C magic blessing. The princess euphoric explains that early apprentices develop even more talent. You realizes that after the learning pact, the blessing appeared, and Athena confirms that it is her gift. It seems that without relatives or a master bearing the blessing, it is impossible to become a mage. The pink-haired girl comments that this is why talent is so decisive, and the heroine understands. She closes her eyes and returns to the first question. A flame of fire appears in her right hand. Athena explains that the founder, now a goddess of magic, left a blessing for descendants and disciples. As she enlarges the fireball, she says that any common mage would conjure that easily. But with the blessing, it is called white magic. The students are even more impressed, although Athena has more to demonstrate. Raising her slightly trembling left hand, she creates a small floating purple flame. Strangely, her fingers tremble as the fire grows until the gloves disintegrate and her skin cracks. The students recoil, frightened, asking what that means. The princess, also shaken, questions if talent has always been indispensable. Eubora covers her mouth, surprised. Athena explains that in her right hand is the white magic with blessing, and in her left the black magic without blessing. Someone screams, heightening the general fear. A maid reaches her, pinching her cheeks, and reminding her of the rule never to use black magic. A priest rushes over and Athena tries to justify, saying she did that just to facilitate the hero's understanding. The maid threatens to tell the queen, and the princess begs for forgiveness. She pleads that they do not reveal it to her mother. While the priest heals her left hand, Eubora apologizes for causing that, but Athena assures her there is no blame, and she says she is happy that they now understand the risks of black magic. The princess regains her composure, and the students soon ask about this type of power, wanting to know if it is evil. But Athena clarifies that it is not a malice, but rather the force of nature itself. Meanwhile, Kong Hansu arrives in the city. The guard says something to him and extends his hand. Thus, even understanding only part of the language, he hands over 4 silver coins, receiving thanks in return. As he walks through the city, he observes several armed people, probably due to the forest and carnivorous plants. He finds the indicated location at the entrance and is grateful for the visual sign. During the night, he comments that the money is excellent and concludes that it is possible to make friends with anyone even without speaking. The god appears uncomfortable and Kong smiles slightly. He also feels uneasy and asks about the deity's gender, making her even more embarrassed. Soon after, he rubs his arm, trying to clean a blood stain that won't come off. The god shows concern and Kong questions him, but the system reveals that the deity holds a secret. Suddenly, he hears someone speaking from the other side of the door and is startled. The voice thanks someone stating that as mayor he will take responsibility. Kong and the god remain still. He shouts that he is taking a shower and asks them to wait. The person aware that he did not speak the language ignores him and says they understood. Kong quickly gets dressed. He grabs his dagger and warns that someone capable of communicating with him is behind the door. He positions himself as he walks over. With that, he realizes there is only one explanation. The person behind the door is not human, but a hostile race. The voice assumed he did not master the language. Kong concludes that the creature on the other side hates heroes and considers that it could be a null or a demon. Breathless, he stares at the door and unlocks it. The god watches attentively as the protagonist sits on the bed and gives permission for entry. He hides the dagger behind him. The person asks for permission as they open the door. Kong remains still, analyzing. He imagines what kind of monster he will see and asserts that it does not matter the race. All can be dangerous. What matters is being able to converse. He asks what happened, and the visitor says not to worry as he is the village leader and came to check on the traveler. Unable to speak the local language, Kong understands and wonders if he is a human or a disguised monster. Noticing that he seems young, the man observes his status window and comments on the peculiar name, leaving Kong uncomfortable, advises to hide his window, surprising him to learn that this is possible. The old man expected to find a bold fairy, but sees only an insignificant boy, and Kong notices his disappointment. The village has a bad history with fairies. The gnolls, expelled by them, migrated to human territory. Many who lost their families took refuge there, seeking revenge. The god looks at Kong with frustration, saying that people no longer remember the grudge and that most of the town are newcomers. Before leaving, the man asks a question. He shows a potion and claims to have dined with a paralysis potion and wants to know why it didn't work. Kong raises the dagger immediately. He advances against the visitor. The man smiles seeing the blade so close to his neck and says it's impressive. Kong is startled to see his arm trembling. The man explains that fairies have high resistance to potions, a type of magic he developed. That's why it wouldn't help to resist just with immunity. He pulls the dagger from Kang's hands, who asks how. The visitor says it wasn't his fault, just pure bad luck. The god states that he tried to warn him, and Kong remains silent. Elsewhere, the leader comments that people hate the anomalies for killing and stealing their families. He reveals that in fact, they were also victims. Kong, tied up, stares at him as he states that the guilty ones are those who dominated the Gnoll's territory. In front of the two captured people, he declares that the fairies are the true enemies, and asks Kong to check his own status window. There is the name Crimson, level 16, a lunatic's blessing and a fair's curse. Kong wonders about this curse, realizing it targets the enemies of fairies, intensifying their hatred and damage. He asks if any god did that, but Crimson clarifies that it comes from the grudge of the fairies he killed. Kong forces a smile, reflecting that every curse carries a meaning. He comments that he shouldn't reveal this to a stranger, but Crimson points a dagger at his face and states that he also doesn't intend to talk much. However, upon seeing the weapon, he inquires where it was obtained. Kong thinks he got it from a gnoll called Butcher of the Blue Moon, but seeing the prisoners, decides not to tell the truth. He looks at the dagger and thinks that survival is a priority. With the blade at his throat, he says he obtained it by killing a fairy that attacked him, claiming they have the same enemy. The old man is impressed that he killed a royal fairy and asks if he knew that. Crimson laughs, questioning if he really didn't know. He states that the more he listens to Kong, the less he wants to kill him, and the boy begs to be spared. The visitor laments that he saw his status window and reveals he is a mage without a blessing. Kong doesn't understand, and Crimson comments that he truly is unaware of that world. The old man declares himself an outcast, saying there are no people or gods merciful enough to teach him. Crimson asks what that means, and Kong replies that he is a lone wolf in the vast forest. The old man laughs, finding the expression curious, even though he can no longer run through it, leaving Kong confused. The deity prays that Kong has a better next life, and he wonders what is wrong with that place. Crimson lights several candles with a green flame. One of the chains comes loose, and a woman falls. The old man steps on her. With a candle in hand, he declares himself a dark mage who needs to sacrifice lives to prolong his own. Smiling cruelly, he says the curse corrodes him, but he can resist by sacrificing even more. Looking at Kong, he states that for having killed a royal fairy, he will be sacrificed without pain. Kong comments that he is very kind for that and begins to devise an escape plan. He calls the leader. Crimson stares at the boy, asking if he wants to plead for his life. Kong shouts that obviously not, and the mage decides to listen to the last words of someone about to die, but he hears a noise and complains that the insects are annoying. With a whip, he begins to strike the fallen fairy. Kong watches. When Crimson finishes, he says it is now quiet. Turning to the protagonist, he asks what he wanted to say. Kong thinks that something about him is not normal, and perhaps he wants to show his own sense of justice. Then he states that his journey must have been difficult, especially since no one recognizes his effort. The old man smiles, asking if he really understands him. Kong says yes, because he is also an outcast. Crimson concludes that this means being a lone wolf in the vast forest, and believes he is also an outcast. The god protests, and Kong agrees, but at least he managed to gain empathy. Crimson is happy and says he liked Kong, but states that as an outcast he must remain alone, and Kong realizes that he wants to kill him to maintain that title. Oh god. He laughs nonstop, and Kong complains that it's not the time. Crimson expresses contentment at finding someone who understands him and insists that Kong watch something important. The protagonist agrees, although he feels that everything has gotten worse. Meanwhile, Crimson observes the fairies around searching for something specific. He suggests to one of the prisoners to accompany him, as he hasn't been feeling well lately. The blonde murmurs something irritated. The old man refuses, saying that a good comrade needs to survive to entertain. With bloodied hands, he holds a chain. He frees the fairy in the center of the magic circle. Smiling, he announces that he will begin. He calls upon the Mother of Life to allow him to receive the remainder of that fair's life. Kong questions the glow of the circle before him. The old man stares at the prisoner. He orders her to give her life to him. The fairy, frightened, frozen, kneeling, Crimson promises to send his friend to be by her side soon. With a cruel smile, he grabs her hair and warns her about the price of refusal. The fairy cries and seems to accept. Crimson declares the pact sealed. Kong wonders what is happening with the leader and himself. He imagines that Crimson is rejuvenating with the fair's life and raises his face, questioning if he has failed. Stepping on the fair's body, the old man asserts that his magic has succeeded. But Kong observes and comments that he doesn't look any younger, and Crimson laughs, revealing that he is not human. Approaching, he says that he not only prolonged life, he asks if Kong knows how many lives of fairies and travelers he has taken, claiming that the curse has become repulsive. Kong acknowledges his determination, but rejects his methods. Crimson explains that upon receiving the curse, he became sick and aged. A traveling wizard suggested an experiment. He opens his shirt. Kong watches perplexed. He realizes that on the old man's chest there is a null. Crimson confirms, revealing that he is a null. Kong asks if it is a hybrid race. The old man bellows that it is the fusion between human and null, a race that hates fairies. Kong questions if he will do everything alone, and the wizard assures him that his dark magic is enough to hunt them. The protagonist says he is not a fairy, and Crimson responds to ignore the details. He squeezes Kang's shoulder, thanks him for helping him find his true identity as an outcast, promises not to forget him, and as a gift will use his life well, and Kong starts to sweat, imagining he will be killed. Crimson confirms because he is an outcast. Kong becomes serious, recognizing the risk of facing a true outcast and accepting his fate. Princess Athena, arch-amazing. She is a prodigy of the magical kingdom, admired by all. Though it is a secret, her life is almost completely occupied with duties and talent, without needing to strive for results. Eubora comments that magic is born from imagination and asks how to make it more efficient. Striving to impress the princess, Eubora is chosen as the first apprentice. The pink-haired girl praises the question and suggests following the tips from the teacher or magical relatives. Athena creates a white light in her hand. The students are impressed and ask if it is a new magic. Soon after, the princess shapes an ice rabbit. Eubora is amazed by the ice magic. The arching family inherited ancestral talents and usually manifests unusual fire each generation. Although Athena explains that her unique magic is ice and offers to try, you cannot. Embarrassed, the princess admits she lacks teaching skills and says that with experience, everyone will succeed. Eubora thanks her, and Athena downplays the importance. Someone calls the princess, diverting her attention. Jiangmin asks what happens to those who do not receive blessings. The others identify themselves and ask for equal treatment. Athena smiles, holds the rabbit, and brings it to her mouth, startling the group. Then she asks who will be the second apprentice, and everyone shouts to be chosen. The heroes call out Athena's name, but she silences them with a word, asking them to notify her when they decide. Yu asks if she did that on purpose, but Athena, impassive, asks what he meant. He lets it go, and the princess ends the class. The heroine comments on the unique magic of the ice rabbit acquired through much training, and Yu asks if it is like dark magic. Athena, startled, asserts that dark magic is different because it requires sacrifices. Meanwhile, Kong is in the magic circle. The old man demands that he give his life. Kong reflects on the weight of sacrifices. Crimson insists, but Kong asks to see Misa one last time. Surprised, Crimson wants to know why, and Kong states that he is her boyfriend. The old man laughs, saying that Cole is the boyfriend. Irritated, Kong asserts that Cole is the ex. Crimson asks for proof, and Kong suggests he smell her. Convinced, Crimson apologizes and says that Gary and Cole would be suspects if Miso went missing. Kong agrees with the reasoning. Crimson asks if Kong has another request, and he asks to be released upon reuniting with Misa. The old man agrees, and Kong declares the pact. Crimson joins his hands, and Kong feels an absurd pain, remembering that he promised it wouldn't hurt. Kong bows, and Crimson bids farewell, saying that Misa has gone far away. Then the old man hesitates, and Kong takes advantage, landing a hit to his chin. Crimson stumbles furious and accuses Kong of deceiving him. The protagonist claims he was deceived first. He almost went insane from the pain. Kong comments that that feeling would turn friends into enemies. The old man asks how he survived. Kong prepares and says that in hell he will know as his magical restriction has ended. The blessing of the excluded even restores life expectancy. With his hand against the wall, Crimson considers himself a beginner who barely survived. Kong points at him, reminding him of the promise to let him go if he survived. He grabs the dagger and says it's time to fulfill the agreement. He thinks while touching his chin and looking at one of the fairies. He declares her the winner. He raises the dagger and cuts the chains. She is startled. Kong holds her by the arm, saying he now has a witness. As she is weak, he places her on his shoulders. She screams something, but he ignores it and runs to the exit. Crimson turns, shouting to where he thinks Kong is going, saying that it is forbidden. Kong remembers the pact and thinks he is safe until he finds Misa, but knows he cannot find someone who has died. The old man, serious, recalls the promise and says it can be annulled if he regains what he lost. Casting something black, the shadow settles on Kong. He realizes it wasn't a bluff. The old man shows frustration, saying he should have accepted a peaceful death. Kong asks if he is serious and asserts that it is still too early to give up. Suddenly, Crimson feels his body give way. He starts to spit blood, confused. His eyes widen. Life is drained from him as he screams. He falls to his knees, feeling his strength vanish. Kong asks what that is. Both look up and see a red glow, and Kong says it is the old man's strength fading. Crimson, even more wrinkled, says he doesn't believe it and claims that no one would leave alive after stealing so many lives. Then he asks if Kong is some immortal vampire. Calmly, Kong reflects on his identity. The god tells him to stop thinking so highly of himself, and Kong thinks that this god is being annoying, but then he decides and declares himself the apostle of the excluded. The deity writhes in shame, and Kong smiles satisfied. The old man spits blood. Kong says that defeating someone of level 16 would give a lot of experience, but decides he needs to escape until he hears someone swearing revenge. Surprised, he looks at the old man. The null in his chest threatens to kill him for destroying his dream. A red aura runs down his arm. He lunges forward shouting that he will kill him, and Kong throws the fairy. He receives a blow to the chest. Kneeling, the null praises his resilience and explains that this is the null fighting style. He saved this power to hunt fairies, and Kong laments. The null is surprised that the protagonist survived. He asks how he is still alive, and Kong admits it was risky. The old man grits his teeth. Powerless, he tries to flee, but a hand grips his leg. He looks down. The fairy holds him, and he insults her while she says something. He screams for them to let go, but Kong is already behind him. And when he realizes the blade is already cutting his head, the fairy is startled, but Kong knows he cannot stop because there is one more left. The null weakened calls for his daughter, lamenting that he cannot take revenge and saying that he loves her. Kong wishes him to rest in peace and finishes. The god laments, and Kong agrees. Turning, he raises the dagger over his shoulder. The fairies are freed. He releases them and calls the villagers and the militia to check everything. He prepares to leave, thinking it is all over, but they start to scream. He turns around smiling. Everyone watches him with grim faces. Not understanding, he replies that it was just minutes ago. Now he is running. He stops at the edge of a cliff and asks what those fairies are saying. When the sun rises, he looks into the abyss. He promises that one day he will reach them. He takes a deep breath and leaps, fleeing from them and claiming to hate that fantasy world. A long time ago, a conflict arose due to learning relationships. However, everything was resolved when several wizards wanted to become masters. Among them, some aspired to the title of Hero's Master. The princess explains that it is necessary to visualize magic with focus. With that, the boys manage to conjure fire. Someone asks about math and magic, but Athena doesn't understand and says it's a merchant's topic. The boy insists, and the princess interrupts, saying that magic does not depend on that. Embarrassed, he is left without an answer. A girl comments that they can use fire magic because her master can too, so math is unnecessary. Embarrassed, the boy thought he could become an archmage just with modern knowledge. An old man corrects the girl, stating that math is applied in magic. Excited, the boy regains his confidence. He gives an explanation using a fireball. The princess only studied theory, but they started using math to increase efficiency. In battle, it's vital to conserve mental energy. To cast, the angle, direction, and wind must be evaluated. The mage casts the fireball, causing an explosion in the air. The bearded man asks if that's what the hero meant, and he confirms. The old man asks excitedly if he can help with the lessons. With discouragement, Athena agrees. The students approach the mages, asking questions. With the master's help, the heroes learn magic quickly. Some gods observe the group. Meanwhile, a storm falls over a quiet city. Lightning strikes the surroundings. A woman tends to the wounds of a young fairy. She says she's done and asks if she feels better. The princess fair's maid, Espresso, responds arrogantly, and the human girl apologizes. All they managed was to reduce the pain with medicine. Only a saint could heal her, but neither of the two in the world would do that. They would never help a common fairy. As she leaves, the girl says she will capture the human and ask the fairy to rest. Furious, the girl knows the culprit is the village leader, but the townsfolk allowed it, so they are complicit. When she returns to the kingdom, she will report everything. An unexpected knock interrupts her. Outside, a voice says it's someone familiar, and the fairy opens the door. The pink-haired girl enters and informs that the mercenaries lost sight of Kong. The blonde asks why they should care about humans. She reminds that it was the protagonist who saved them from the evil leader. The girl says humans are treacherous and that one carried the princess's dagger, but the other replies that he still saved them. The girl falls silent as they received no order to kill him, but says humans are beasts that kill each other. The other scolds her for calling them that. Another fairy appears and questions what that remark meant. They call her advisor, Celeblis. The redhead asks if everything is all right, and the blue-haired one demands an answer. Celeblis is a royal fairy named Holy Sun, and despite being eternal, ended up serving as a toy for Crimson and remained trapped longer in the basement. Esso says everything will be resolved when they tell the kingdom. But the fairy screams that it's not over yet, because even fleeing alone, Kong freed her. Convinced, she believes Crimson was only seeking her eternal life. But the advisor says the savior used dark magic. Hansu broke the pact, and when that happens, everything acquired must be paid back. That's why the leaders self-destruct by underestimating Kong. Smiling, Celeblis recalls Espresso running carefree through the palace. Crying, the blonde vents that the young one doesn't understand the depth of her despair and the humiliation she feels. The other agrees, but insists she needs to find the protagonist. Still, the fairy warns her of the risk of going out in that situation. Irritated, the young girl asks not to be called advisor the next time they meet. According to her, that title doesn't suit a lady who loses her patience easily. From the wall, the little god watches everything. Little by little, he moves away from there. In the forest, the deity observes the boy from above, wondering if he is still alive. Tired, the protagonist calls out to the god, questioning if he needs glasses. Meanwhile, the prince leads the aspiring swordsman. As they enter the hall, they show surprise and excitement, asking if this is a tea break and not a fencing class. The banquet hall shines in the eyes of the young ones. Soon, everyone settles at the table. Smiling, the blonde raises his cup and proposes a toast to the heroes who chose the path of the sword. On one side, the veterans shout, "Hooray!" and their enthusiasm frightens the newcomers. With his cup in hand, the young man explains that the idea they had of training is quite naive, and that here they will be shown true fencing, ordering the knight commander to make a demonstration, a request the man accepts as an honor. Then, climbing up to the arena. First, the boy shows the version of fencing they imagine, telling the knight to fight without using his own technique. Smiling, the prince charges, executing sword movements worthy of a video game. A girl comments, impressed, that it's amazing, and another hero emphasizes that despite everything, it's still fencing. Then, the knight, serious, disarms the prince with a single sword throw. The blade falls beside the young man, who praises the commander's dance of swords, leaving him flattered. Next, the prince picks up his weapon and announces that he will now show the fencing style that heroes will truly learn. Soon after, the blonde asks the commander to use all his strength. The prince's wish is law for the man who begins to emanate aura through his sword. With the same aura, the little blonde prepares to receive him. Then the commander advances, and the blades collide with force. In the clash, the knight's sword breaks. Kneeling, he admits defeat. Satisfied, the young man praises the evolution of the man's technique, who thanks him deeply. At the table, the heroes exchange glances and ask what that was. Directly, the prince explains that true fencing is the power to penetrate all of the enemy's defenses with a single strike. One of the boys, impressed, finally understands the importance of efficiency. With the concept clear, the blonde announces the start of fencing lessons, but first asks them to finish their tea. As they drink, they notice something strange in the flavor. Everyone complains that it is horrible. To learn fencing, they need to take that medicine and receive the warrior's blessing. So, the prince warns that they will have to get used to the taste. Warrior is the title for those who have met the requirements to become stronger and must now defeat enemies with justice and love. Choi Kang, brave, downs the contents in one go and even asks for another dose. The blonde suggests he eat something and asks the commander to bring more tea. Thus, the knight serves him another steaming cup. The gods, curious, watch the scene and let out some laments. In another part of the world, Kong Hansa comments that the place is dangerous, but at least there are no monsters in the forest below the cliff, recalling the pursuit by the village mercenaries. If the guard hadn't opened the gate, the protagonist would have already been captured. High up in a tree, the boy observes some gnolls. Upon noticing his presence, the leader talks about the meet up there. The gnolls greet him in a polite manner, and it is ironic to realize that he trusts monsters more than fairies and humans. Smiling, he considers the situation perfect. Then he jumps from the tree. As he falls, he already thinks about what question he will ask the creatures. One gnoll is caught off guard by a knee to the head. Another receives an elbow to the mouth. The leader has his throat ripped out by the protagonist. Soon after, the boy lands lightly on the ground. Although the three were easy to defeat, the small deity analyzes the boy, who feels his body lighter and wonders if he leveled up. Checking the status window, he notices that only his dividend increased to 3.43 while his level remains at 1. Intrigued, he asks what this dividend means, and the god laughs, saying that the higher the better. But the protagonist cannot thank him. For the first time, he gains something truly useful from the god, and then approaches the gnoll that took the knee. Hansa comments, still confused because of the fairies, and the gnoll excited asks about fairy meat. The boy confirms that he has tried it. He recalls the solution created by the former leader and begins to inquire about gnoll fencing. Despite still being weak and knowing that even reaching level 2 won't make him powerful immediately, he decides to learn some techniques. The monster drooling speaks of the power that comes from meat, and the young man asks how the eyes turn red. The gnoll replies that it is thanks to the power of the meat requiring a huge amount of food, and the protagonist says he wants to see this transformation. In the end, Hansu realizes he didn't gather much useful information beyond power of meat, concluding that he will have to study the gnoll ecosystem if he wants to take his revenge. Meanwhile, Prince Aloes comments that magic requires talent, but fencing can be mastered with time and money. He shares various insights on the subject, but the young ones show little interest. With a tired expression, the blue-haired boy asks for more tea, and the blonde explains that the effectiveness decreases if they drink too much. Choi Gang-man, irritated, thinks about how he needs to strengthen himself and stand out. The prince suggests cleaning the mouth with honey, emphasizing that consistency is essential and that 2 cups a day are sufficient. Confident, Choi decides to maintain this routine, but the blonde warns that the warrior's blessing will not appear immediately. Intrigued, the boy asks how long it will take, hearing that it could take up to a year. Before he can complain about the time frame, a light appears before him and he receives a new blessing of courage. Euphoric, he realizes that it strengthens him the more he fights. But the effect resets if he is defeated or gives up. With his hand on his face, he finds it incredible, making the battle god proud and annoying a martial god. The blonde congratulates him, placing enormous expectations on the fact that he received a blessing so early. Right after, the prince teaches how to hide the status window. In another area, a gnoll screams for meat while Kong watches him devouring a wild boar. In silence, he reflects on having followed the monster for 2 days just to learn about this so-called power of meat. During the meal, the gnoll notices something strange and attacks the boy, who remembers how he is always assaulted as soon as he lets his guard down. Until that moment, the monster had not managed to hit him. After a kick, the boy tells him not to get up again, and the defeated gnoll thinks that the human is still weak. Kong asks if he is really level 6, and the excited wolf confirms, showing fairy hair tied to his arm. Curious, the young man recalls that gnolls usually rip the heads off fairies and asks how he managed to hunt too. The monster replies that he is strong while the protagonist is the strange one. The boy wants to know if the monster can see his level, and the wolf says no, but is sure he is level 1, calling him easy prey. Irritated, Kong punches the gnoll in the head, concluding that he must feel this by instinct. After a while, the monster screams, indicating a path, revealing that there are many fairies in that direction. Smiling, the boy gets excited, as it is precisely the side of the fairy village that ambushed him. The gnoll comments that fairy meat is not good, leaving the protagonist confused. In a single bite, the gnoll swallows a whole rabbit, saying that this meat, yes, is excellent. Kong realizes that his strength increases the more he eats and considers this much simpler than resorting to dark magic like the old leader did. Then asks if the gnoll is satisfied. However, the monster screams that he is full and his muscles grow along with his body. His fur turns reddish, and he concludes that he needs more meat. Salivating, he calls the protagonist talking meat. Then he lunges forward, claiming that the boy will be his meal. But the young man gathers a red aura in his hand. Thanking the gnoll, he reveals that he discovered the power of meat because of him. In a swift motion, the protagonist attacks the creature's abdomen, cutting the gnoll's body in half. Kong observes his own hands. On the ground, the monster asks how that meat can be so strong. Smiling, the boy thanks him for the time they spent together and says he is powerful thanks to him. The gnoll questions if the boy is also a gnoll, contradicting, He states he is just human. Looking at himself, he finds all of this incredible, while feeling an intense, empty emotion but close to the desire to always be sated like a null. The aura spreads throughout his body. Impressed, the god concludes that this is the true power of meat. But the young man believes that no one else will be able to use this ability. Without the blessing of the excluded, he would probably have died when his life force was drained. Thanks to that blessing, before the energy runs out, it regenerates, forming an infinite cycle. Excited, he says that this power is truly fantastic. But the god scolds him, telling him to stop acting like a child. Sometime later, Kong darts through the forest at night. The other monsters smell fresh meat. Manically, he pushes them out of the way. After knocking down two, he continues running and leaves the deity stunned. Even stronger, he is not happy to be running when he could be under the covers messing with his phone. Still, he crosses the forest filled with creatures that devour people. The young god points to the left, and the boy thanks him for the warning. Upon reaching a wall, he smiles and pulls out the dagger, planning to take revenge using a bit of this new power. Two guards are talking nearby. Hidden in the bushes, Kong intended to sneak in from behind, but soon realizes that the security is stricter than he expected. In his mind, he feels relieved to have memorized the village map. The little god tells him to go ahead, which confuses him. He says it is very sudden, but the young man insists on the idea. He is suspicious of the deity's attitude, but his instincts agree. Upon reaching the wall, he prepares to jump. He drives the dagger into the wood. With a push, he climbs and passes to the other side, landing softly on the ground. Relieved, he thinks it is good that there are no guards at that point. Excited, the god tells him to be grateful, and the boy promises eternal gratitude. However, the moment has come to start his mission. One of the guards leaves the bathroom. He is startled to feel a presence behind him, but the young man drives the dagger into his throat. The man still tries to say something. However, he soon dies and collapses, making the boy realize that there is no difference between killing humans and monsters. Dragging the body, he imagines that there are people who will miss that guard. Still, he thinks that he also has a family he couldn't say goodbye to. With a heavy expression, he declares that he will not be trampled by any of them. The deity watches him with a provocative gaze. After a while, the young man sighs, exhausted. After killing so many, he questions why no one has noticed yet. He becomes curious and wonders where the fairies are. The god looks at him with disdain as Kong tries to understand why he can't find any of them. Ironically, assuming that they are all in the bathroom, the small deity mocks the protagonist's late realization. Suddenly, he hears human voices. He sees some people walking through the streets and talking. While carrying figures with bags covering their heads, the boy observes the scene, finding it curious. In the room of the fairy Espresso, behind her, a hand approaches, covering her mouth. It prevents her from screaming, ordering her to stay quiet. The man places a bag over her head. Another asks about the injury, and the first explains that the young woman bit him when he tried to gag her. The older one asserts that the fairy must accompany them. They command her to keep walking, and she thinks that the other fairies are also being taken. By the echo of the place, the girl realizes she has been taken to the old leader's basement. One of the women present admits that they knew what Crimson was doing, but they only wanted to protect their way of life. Under the bag, Espresso recognizes the voice of the healer from before. All the fairies are gathered there, and the woman declares that this is their punishment, the retribution for having left the leader to fight alone. One of the villagers claims to have heard that the fairies despise humans, that they would take their homes and kill their families if they survived. For this reason, a knight orders everyone to stay home as something is about to happen, and even the mercenaries should not remain outside. The young woman stays silent and suggests they start at once. With a psychotic look, they decide to act in Crimson's name. They attack directly at the chest of one of the fairies, causing her death. The knight is the one who signs the final sentence. Then they say goodbye to Espresso. They all advance and exterminate the remaining fairies. They claim that only one is left. Then they begin to discuss the fate of the last one. The fairy herself warns that their goal will not be achieved while she is alive. They hesitate as she is at the top of the hierarchy and they fear reprisals. The young woman understands the conflict they feel, but she remembers that they try to kill their own savior only to keep a secret, which fills her with rage. One of the boys suggests sparing her if she swears silence, but she states that this kind of oath is impossible. The blue-haired girl asks why she refused since she could lie. Smiling, the woman replies that a fairy does not lie, not even to survive. With no alternative, they decide to do it in the least painful way possible. The knight prepares himself with her eyes closed. She does not see the blood flying until she feels splatters on her face and instinctively opens her eyes. Before her, the head of the executioner is in the air. Confused, she tries to understand what happened. Kong is right in front of her. She recognizes him. Surprised, the fairy says something that the protagonist does not understand. The boy is impressed to have found her again, but before any dialogue, he needs to deal with the survivors. Thus, he charges at the men as he had planned from the beginning. One of the young women panics and kneels, crying. She cries out for help. Surprised, the boy realizes he understands the language and is happy to finally grasp something. But unfortunately for her, he eliminates her right after. Soon after, he notices another girl trying to escape and calling for help. He simply throws the dagger, hitting the fugitive's head. He watches the body fall lifeless. Everything happens even more easily than he expected, and he concludes that his best strategy was to take down the most dangerous one first. Then, Celeblis tries to talk to the protagonist. He wonders what she is saying until he notices his own status window. She approaches, implying that she is showing it on purpose. Kong notices that she has 3 high-level blessings. Seeing the Tamer blessing, he considers it useless without animals nearby. Still, he imagines there must be some reason for her to display that window. He asks if her name is Kelly Bless, and the young woman confirms. Seeing her smile, he feels nothing special, probably because of his own blessing. Even so, it is clear that there is something more there. The god appears uncomfortable and encourages the boy to continue living as an outcast. Bending down, Kong sighs, saying he will be punished if he stops being an outcast. The young fairy does not understand, and the boy concludes that she is lucky. The initial plan was to exterminate all. However, he decided to spare her precisely because she had an experience similar to his. To survive, he made sure to spread his name to the people of that world, but he realized that it served no purpose. He orders her to turn her back and thinks it wouldn't be different from the villagers if he eliminated all the fairies from that place. The young woman tries to rise with difficulty, but without strength, she collapses. Quickly, he supports her, complaining that she shouldn't irritate him. He holds her while she reacts, strangely happy. He is surprised to notice that she knows how to say his name, and she seems to confirm it. Sometime later, they walk side by side, and he wonders why everything is so quiet, even after so many deaths. Then he decides to ask the god, but the small deity refuses to talk. The young man understands that he will need to part ways with the young woman to calm the god's anger. He cannot trust anyone in the village, and the forest is filled with malies. Before anything else, they need to get out of there. So, they run among the trees, and the young man carries her in his arms. At one point, the young woman calls him and says something that catches his attention. She points up and speaks a few more words. He raises his gaze, confused. Frightened, he sees a huge phoenix cutting through the sky above them. The creature lets out a cry in their direction and lands right in front of the two. The young man thinks he will be fine thanks to its blessing, but estimates that the fairy in his arms would be reduced to ashes. The young woman tugs at his shirt, saying something he interprets as a request to be put down. He asks if she wants to stay behind so he can escape. However, she takes a few steps toward the flaming bird. Seeming capable of conversing with the creature normally, Kong wonders if by any chance she has become friends with the phoenix. Then Celebis calls his name, saying something more with his name at the end. She approaches. The young man was going to ask what she was saying when he receives a sudden kiss, while the small deity is in shock at the scene. The boy blushing questions the reason for that gesture. The girl, however, just smiles at him while the phoenix watches the two in silence. Confused, he sees the fairy mounting the creature, which rises and takes flight, leaving him standing watching the departure. Soon after, the god accuses the excluded one of a crime, and irritated, the young man pulls his own hair. Equally furious, he laments having lost his first time as a reward for saving someone, calling it harassment. However, when checking the status window, he discovers a new fairy blessing, feeling satisfied that it is of high rank. The deity stares at him, bewildered, but the young man just comments on the ironies of life. The blessing extends his lifespan and prolongs youth, as well as making fairies more receptive. He can consume this blessing to increase his power, even though it burns part of his longevity. The god grumbles at the boy's happiness, but Kong is glad to be away from the fairy. With the atmosphere lighter between the two, the small deity hears him suggest that they venture deeper into the forest. Sometime later, new monsters appear and the young man approaches, asking if everything will be all right. Kong proposes a tour of the house. In another scenario, the prince comments that they arrived there 3 days ago and that now they will hunt to level up. The blonde reassures the group, saying that the Order of Knights will attract the monsters. The princess emphasizes the importance of blessings, whose value increases with rank and level. The young people get excited about the chance to evolve while the girls comment on the physical changes. Suddenly, someone spots a slime, but before they can attack it, the prince and princess explain that they are useful. The princess says that these creatures prevent infections, and the young people, embarrassed, promise not to attack them. Then the prince, clapping his hands, comments that they should deal with level 2 goblins, but that on that day, they will hunt level 4 Lees. The students become apprehensive, but the princess reassures them, reminding them that they could be revived by the saint. The prince guarantees that the group is even capable of facing level 6 orcs. When the monsters approach, the young people, still tense, advance to combat. A white null attacks first and injures one of the heroes who collapses. Then others are hit and a girl tries to cast a spell but fails. Afraid, she cries as the creature gets closer and closer. Everyone cries for help, and the prince, exhausted, cuts the null in half with a single blow. The novices, physically and mentally destroyed, cry on the ground. The saint appears, praising the prince for guiding the heroes. Kneeling, she offers a prayer and heals one of the young men with her luminous aura. As soon as the door closes, the young man stands up renewed, claiming that he has been revived. The girl, serious, encourages the group to give their all, promising to bring them back as many times as necessary. Everyone remains tired, reflecting on the persistence of that null. Choi thanks for the time gained, and the young man approaches from behind, striking the monster with a precise thrust. The blessing of courage pushes him away, and the creature falls dead, leaning against the tree. Meanwhile, the gods discuss among praises and criticisms, and he realizes he has leveled up to level 2, celebrating the achievement. Thanks to the new blessings of acceleration and command, he looks at his two companions and acknowledges their usefulness. A distant scream catches his attention, and the others, deluded by faith, attack the monster in the name of their goddess, finishing it off together. The blonde girl thanks, happy to have reached level 2. While the others watch in frustration, she reflects on how wonderful she is, and a god stares at her intensely, causing her despair. Distressed, she denies being in an abusive relationship, at which point, a god of beauty grants her the blessing color of beauty. Excited, the young woman considers the blessing perfect for herself, and the boys promise to protect her, saying that this is a man's duty. Grateful, she decides to trust them, which makes some other boys uncomfortable. Two of them claim they can no longer help Choi Gangmin, leaving him confused, and they decide to support Min from now on. Choi praises her strategy and joins two other girls to hunt, both of whom agree. The gods continue to observe the heroes while Yu falls to the ground, trying to rise after dropping the sword. The null takes the opportunity to grab the weapon, but she convinces herself that she can win, casting a fire spell that incinerates the monster. Exhausted, she collapses, but upon checking the status window, she notices she is at level 2 and considers it a great start. The gods cheer for her, and she thanks them, analyzing her blessing from the martial god. A second monster approaches from behind, but she recovers the weapon and slashes the null's chest, blocking the attack with the sword. Taking advantage of the opening, she conjures flames over the enemy, and with a decisive strike brings down the creature. Tired, she feels her body recover and levels up to level 3, radiant. In another part of the battlefield, Choi watches everything, impressed, while the blonde girl looks at him curiously, and each leads their group. Further ahead, the protagonist holds a null and splits it without delay. The little deity questions how many have already died, but he prefers not to answer, knowing he has easily surpassed the mark of 1,000. Sitting on one of the bodies, the young man follows the window during the fights and notices another curse emerging. Looking up at the sky, he concludes that he cannot level up because of the goddess's curse. The hero's curse reduces his experience, and this leaves him distressed. The deity comments on the stars, confusing the boy, who thinks it is just irony. He returns to the status panel, questioning the curse that makes him instill fear in friendly races. Downcast, he feels even more excluded, something that pleases the young god. Looking down, he finds a gold bracelet, and with his pouch already full of coins, decides that he will also grow strong through the power of wealth. Other monsters approach, and several armed Lees swear to kill the scary meat. Despite feeling confident, he is surprised to see so many Lees gathered. Kong notices that one of them is level 9 and has the warrior blessing. Smiling, he realizes that the monsters have devised a strategy as they cannot defeat him just by numbers. Filled with hatred, they all charge to devour him, but he dodges with a leap, and still thanks. After all, he now has several teachers who sought him out of their own will. Upon seeing him, the nulles ask if he is one of them, but with a single blow, the protagonist nearly splits one in half. Looking back, He thanks again for having learned to handle his own power. The creature's cautious feel threatened by the strength of that human. Proud Kong asserts that regardless of what they do, they will remain weak. Later, the young man accumulates a huge amount of gold, but faces problems in negotiations due to the language. Needing a translator. Lying on the ground, he concludes that the anomalies are trustworthy precisely because they are terrible liars. Then a demon appears from behind, asking who took care of the anomalies. Surprised, the boy sees the man confused for having called him idiot human, but the sentence is interrupted when the protagonist grabs him by the shirt. Excited, the young man comments that he finally got a smart translator and confuses the demon with a humanoid null. The other, irritated, insists that he is a demon, not a null. Confused, the young man thinks that demons would be very powerful humanoids. The kidnapper goddess had said they would need to defeat the leader of the demons, the king. If the gods ask for help, it is because the demons are strong, but that one didn't seem so scary. Furious, the demon complains that you don't hit someone and then ask for friendship. Also explaining that not all demons are extraordinary. Bland, the boy apologizes, saying he is weak, which almost makes the demon cry. Trying to maintain his composure, the man comments on the protagonist's strange strength, which happy he attributes all to his blessing. The demon, however, replies that he has more curses than blessings. Astonished, the young man discovers that the stranger possesses the observer's blessing, capable of seeing others' status windows. The protagonist understands, and the other asks to be released, but the boy says that this is just a different way of making friends, further irritating him. While staring at him, Kong comments that he is shrewd, and the demon explains that being a dark mage, he really needs to be clever. At the moment, he was training to get married, which leaves the boy completely confused. In a mocking tone, the man asserts that he is old enough already. The little deity, excited, encourages the boy to ask more questions about the demon's life. Enthusiastic, he wants to know why he hasn't married yet, but the other, filled with rage, replies that he would rather die than become a toy for humans. Jokingly, the boy comments that it would be a shame to die without knowing the pleasures of the flesh. He explains that more powerful demons can have multiple wives, but being weak, that one fled to avoid ending up as the husband of some random demon. The young man feels pity, but the demon asks him not to feel anything. Then he asks how he is still able to move, leaving Kong confused. The mage reveals that he used a paralysis potion that would affect even a fairy, but the boy, despite being level 1, remained unharmed. Upon seeing the vial, the boy immediately remembers Crimson. Gritting his teeth, he curses the demon, who looks frightened, smiling in a disturbing way. Kong recalls something extremely annoying. He laughs while holding the demon firmly. A magic begins to rise up the boy's leg, but dissipates before reaching his head. Threateningly, he asks what the other is trying to do, and the mage, in panic, screams upon realizing that his sealing spell has failed. The young man remains silent, increasing the tension. Then he asks what the demon's relationship is with the former leader. Smiling, the man considers the question absurd as he has met several leaders. However, the protagonist specifies he speaks of the leader who had a null trap to his chest. The mage's expression darkens, and he remembers a human on the brink of death with a tragic story. As he begins to explain that he saved that young man from the curse, the protagonist interrupts him, filled with rage, recognizing the dark mage who helped Crimson now standing right in front of him. Elsewhere, the heroes gather. The unhappy saint warns that the other boys have given up and returned to the temple. Resources are now directed to those who remained, which cheers the group. Elsa's comments that leveling up 3 times a day is impressive, praising the saviors, although he knows that the true wonder is the hero's blessing. Soon, someone calls for the young man. A knight warns about a null feeding while the order is busy. The woman asks the creature's level, and he replies that it is 5. She reasons that there are 3 adventurers at that same level, and the prince confirms considering it a good opportunity for experience. Thus, everyone follows him. As they approach the monster, the prince asks for silence, explaining that although it seems foolish, it is strong and loves to fight. The princess mentions that a null can use dark magic when satisfied, recommending caution when its eyes turn red. Despite the caution, the monster notices them, and she apologizes for being discovered. With red eyes, the null roars. The princes step back, wishing good luck to the boys who feel apprehensive. Using his command blessing, Choi tries to calm them, thinking of buying time. As the null prepares, he asserts that the creature must be slow. But in a swift leap, it is already before them, frightening the young man. An explosion occurs, and one of the boys calls for the injured companion. The null growls, charging at the heroes and throwing them away until a fire spell hits its face. Yu is tense but focused, preparing to attack cunningly. She lunges with her sword, but does not see something approaching and receives a knee to the stomach, spitting blood. With no time to react, the monster grabs her and throws her against the blonde. With the young woman in his arms, the girl trembles, unsure of how to act. Stammering, she tries to ask for help. The null approaches, and her charm blessing activates as she pleads and cries. The monster catches the scent and extends its hand, licking its lips until a cut opens its neck, splattering blood on the girl's face. The prince asks if the little heroine is okay. She still trembles with fear while an innocent god sighs in relief. An evil god shows frustration and a water goddess washes her face. The prince looks back, praises the courage of the young ones, and wishes that the deities bless them. In another location, the demon bleeding on the ground claims that the protagonist is worse than a demon for swinging him like a rag. Frighteningly, the boy calls him, and he tries to say he cannot fulfill the request. The young man laughs and asks if he wants to die, leaving him terrified. The horned one then conjures a spell that heals him and cleans his blood. Irritated, the boy says that out of pity for the leader, he almost died. He wants to know if he will receive help, but the demon mentions a saint in the nearby town and says he doesn't want to die before getting married. Hence, he agrees to help and take him to another city. The protagonist smiles, as he does not want to stay where there are servants of the goddess. As they walk, the demon suggests a shortcut to avoid checking their identities. The boy sees no problem, since he would also have difficulties not speaking the human language. The god, for his part, finds it amusing. At another point, the redhead comments that Ohan Wu might be useful, but it's strange that he doesn't know where a public bathroom is. The boy thinks that this kind of detail never appears in mangas and novels. Moreover, she has been paying for the lodging, armor, and even for his weapon. Suddenly, the girl stops and says she is bothered by the fact that he is staring at her intensely from behind. Convinced, Hanu says he likes walking behind people, thinking that a beautiful girl is taking care of him, a complete stranger, thanks to his protagonist's blessing. As they get closer, she states that she was surprised when he tried to attack a slime and comments that he must not have a brain, even trying to defend himself. The young woman warns that they are in orc territory, more dangerous than that of the Gnolls, and asks for caution. He agrees, but she doubts his understanding. Smiling, he assures her that he understood, and they stare at each other. Even the gods gather to watch them, and he believes he will gain more blessings. The redhead, not understanding, tells him to stop laughing and stay alert, as that territory is dangerous for rank slime mercenaries. Excited, he looks at his ring, thinking he has gained a blessing that gives experience bonuses despite the risk. Further ahead, he asks if they are in the right place, since there are no Gnolls around, which he also finds strange. Han Wu comments that things like this happen to protagonists, but she doesn't understand. She opens a scroll, certain that they could complete the mission of collecting null ears. Confident, the young man suggests exploring more of the forest, but the girl recommends seeking more information at the guild. He asks her to trust him, and she scared questions his confidence. Suddenly, an axe flies towards him, but he dodges. Fallen on the ground, he watches in shock as the redhead encourages him to get up and face the null. However, his sword does not pierce the creature's armor. She realizes it is a null named by the steel armor and asks if he can stand. Others approach, and the warrior tells him to pay attention while she distracts them. He hesitates, worried about the experience, and she tells him to stop with the jokes. Before he can respond, he gets hit by a stone and becomes dizzy. As he falls, the young woman calls out to him, but he only thinks it's strange being the protagonist. Suddenly, he wakes up startled and asks about the Lees. The redhead, Dirty, says she took care of all of them, but he notices that she has lost an arm. Terrified, he asks if it was because of him, but the girl claims it was her own fault. With the weight of guilt, he wonders how he can continue as a protagonist. Desperate, he tries to use his blessing to heal her, but she asks him to calm down. Smiling, she says the fault is hers, while he realizes that his blessing only exempts him from responsibility. Up above, the gods laugh and punish him with a curse of limited vision. He does not understand what is happening, and the redhead worried wants to know if he is okay. She notices that he is acting strange and talking to himself. He realizes he cannot see her status window. Angrily, he falls to the ground, frustrated with the dream of traveling with a beautiful girl. Confused, she states that the forest is dangerous and suggests they go back before Morgels appear. He agrees, remembering that the saint in the town can heal her arm and promises to take responsibility. Elsewhere, Kong asks the demon's name. The man, irritated, says he is Cogmos, the 23rd son of the 348th wife of the Demon King. Although royalty is determined by power, they do not value status. Kong laughs and describes him as an ordinary demon. Noticing the other's sadness, he apologizes and asks how he prefers to be called. The man recounts that an old friend, now the wife of the seventh demon king, used to call him Moss. However, he never managed to congratulate her on her son. The story irritates Kong. He feels pity for the demon, but considers his own journey more tragic. Bored, the god tells them to leave the forest soon. Kong notices his strange behavior, especially after being aggressive with the fairies. Mo's looking down notices something. He announces that they have arrived, leaving the boy confused. They're already close to exiting the forest, but the demon warns not to let their guard down. Ahead, they will enter the realm of the Swordmaster Knights, which intrigues Kong. Moose confirms that it is also orc territory, which surprises him. He imagines that there might be someone interesting over there. However, the demon warns that the orcs are stronger than the gnolls. Observing the cliff, the two spot the orcs. Kong is impressed to see them taming animals. Suddenly, an orc catches the scent of a human. Licking their lips, they become eager to feast. The orcs spot the travelers, and Mo blames the young one who does not understand. The demon explains that his eyes shine in the dark. The boy admits he forgot, leaving Mo astonished. After disabling the glow, he asks if it's better, but the demon becomes furious because he didn't do it earlier. The boy just laughs, and Mose calls him an idiot. Soon, several orcs approach. Activating the glow again, the young man says he sees better this way. At night, he counts that there are only 10. Confident, he states that they seem relaxed. Moss explains that they are underestimating the boy because he looks like a tired mercenary. Kong jumps from the cliff and tries to talk. Moss sighs, allowing him to do as he wishes. With determination, he calls out to them. The orcs call him Piggy and demand his belongings. He gets irritated and says he is human. Surprised, one of the orcs comments that the Piggy speaks their language and warns the others. Kong thinks they are more communicative than the anomalies, but still hard to deal with. Preparing his dagger, he remembers that Mo said they are stronger. Pulling out the weapon, he orders them to hand everything over. An orc becomes furious and says he is an orc, not a pig. Then the young man attacks him in the chest. He wonders if he will be able to defeat them, but remembers the blessing of the excluded. Smiling, he says he will show who has pig blood. Kong throws the dagger and hits one of them in the head. The orcs argue about who will face him. The young man stares at them with red eyes. He asks Mose if they weren't stronger, and he affirms that the bizarre one is the boy. Pulling the dagger back, Kong says they are not strong. After cleaning the weapon, he comments that it was easier than it seemed. Turning around, he complains that Mo should be more useful until he notices something. Seeing the demon's legs burning, he asks what is happening. Confused, Mo just says it looks dangerous. He asks Kong to look at the sky. The young man obeys and sees a huge dragon flying. Curious, he asks where it is going, and Mo says there is a saint over there. Confused, the protagonist confirms, and the demon explains that it is expected for humanity's greatest weapon to detect from a long distance. The fairy kingdom is in that direction, so something serious must have happened. Relieved, Kong says he survived, but considers it bad luck to encounter it now. Although the boy warns about the burns, the horned one downplays it and states it will take time to heal, suggesting that the protagonist carry him. The young man refuses. After a silence, he reflects on his experiences and on helping a demon. The god comments that he should have been handed over to the orcs, but the protagonist disagrees. Mo says the situation is reciprocal, as his reputation would be at stake if they found out a demon accepted help from a human. Kong laughs and threatens to spread this, which makes the demon question his humanity. Kong claims he is not ordinary, almost becoming a hero, leaving Ma surprised. Confused, the protagonist mentions his status window, and the demon is astonished as the hero's curse is usually imposed on demons. The curse prevents level increase, rendering a demon practically dead. The young man understands that the other's revenge is impossible. Mose wants to know how he became so strong just with the fair's blessing. The demon has never heard of the blessing of the excluded and asks for explanations, but Kong warns him about the risk of falling. Mose is unaware of the blessing, but recalls a similar curse. Irritated, the protagonist realizes that the demon does not understand the true meaning of excluded and feels uncomfortable with the observation of his status window. Thinking about the blessing, he questions if everything will return to the beginning. Mose concludes that the blessing prevents hunger or fatigue because everything resets. The young man agrees, and the demon says it sounds more like a curse. Kong notes that the accumulated experience also resets. Curious, Moss asks how he keeps getting stronger, intriguing the protagonist. Then the boy consults the god, who recalls the past, leaving him confused. In another location, an irritated young man asks about the hero's defeat. Chi Gang Min tries to calm him down, but a prince intervenes, stating that the NLES are strong, but will be defeated as they level up. The newcomers nod, disheartened. The prince reflects on the hero's levels and the scarcity of anomalies. A guard informs that the dispatch troop has not been found, suggesting the intervention of knights. The prince considers that only one person might have done the job, but dismisses it. He orders the heroes to prepare to face orcs. Even during the investigations, a tired adventurer arrives at the temple, surprising the prince. Recognized as Ohan Wu, he seeks the saint, and everyone is surprised that he trained alone. Exhausted, he asks about the saint. While the prince asks him to calm down, he apologizes, saying that the life of the girl he was carrying was at risk. Princess Rosina is surprised to see him. The mercenary dismounts from Han Wu and LT, Unk and GT, S back, stating she wants to retire. While the princess notices the absence of the redhead's left arm, trying to disguise it, the mercenary downplays the incident. The hero smiles and asks to be taken to the saint. Upon finding her, she wants to know the reason for the confusion. The prince explains that Han Wu has returned. Before he can ask for anything, 2 spears block him. The guard orders him to stop, and Han Wu pleads to speak with the saint. She is surprised that he is low level and still cursed. He tries to divert by mentioning a great companion. The saint looks at the redhead, notices a noble,